Welcome to my podcast. My name is Aldo Mazza, drummer, percussionist, and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to join us in conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in the music world. I have with me, and I'm so fortunate to have a man with like a beautiful beard, a nice man, and a man with many talents, and he builds some incredible drums. Ronn Dunnett. Yes, thanks for joining me. I have a couple of questions for you. Some people may not know your work or who you are. Would you mind just giving us some background and telling us where you come from, what brought you here to this Shaping Your Journey podcast?
Oh, Aldo. I like how you like to start off with a very easy question that I have a quick answer to. I don't know how to encapsulate all that in 30 seconds or less.
Take your time.
I was born in Regina, and that's kind of where it all started. In my early youth, I ended up in foster care, and basically as part of that foster care program, I had to take drum lessons and or take something. I either had to take karate lessons at the Y, or I could go with the foster parent to Moose Jaw and with some of the other kids, and any excuse to get out of the house. So I took drum lessons from a 50-year-old piano teacher, very nice woman, but anyway, that's how I got involved in drums, and I just never lost that interest in it. And
then you moved out further west to BC after that.
Yeah, I did the usual. I was in a band and did the bar circuit in Western Canada and Eastern Canada, actually. And at some point in 88 or 89, I moved out to Vancouver to sort of set things up for myself, and got out here and started playing and recording out here, and met my wife, and just by accident, I guess, we ended up going to Australia for a year. And as the story goes, I packed my drums way before I left, but when I was over there, I had a mountain bike that had some parts on it. One of the parts, a little handle, broke off and hit the ground, and made this kind of cool sound. And I picked it up, and as it turned out, it was titanium. And I just remember thinking, kind of stuck in my head, I wonder what a drum would sound like. And so, very long story short, I came back here. I ended up discovering Boeing surplus in Seattle, and I went down there and ended up buying some titanium off of their back lot, and brought it home and made a drum. And that's kind of really how I ended up here. I guess it's like most awesome careers, you just sort of fell into it, the sort of pachinko machine of life. It rattles down, and finally here I am.
It's interesting how that happens, like what triggers a specific movement, or you're playing and then all of a sudden the question comes up, like, what would it sound like in titanium? That's interesting. I mean, we all get affected in one form or another. Maybe, I'm not sure if you knew this, but back in '72, I was designing and building drums also.
Told me, yeah.
And I discovered, well, being a short person, I designed, some really interesting things. But one of the main attributes was, being small, people couldn't see me, and I couldn't see them. So I made them out of clear plastic. Where I was studying drums, there's a plastic factory, and I would go up and down. And one day I went in and I said, "Would you be able to make cylinders, like 18 inches?" No. I said, "How big could you make a cylinder?" a form. He says, well, the biggest one we could do is 18 inches. I said, perfect. But let's make them longer since I think if you make them longer, you'll have a nicer lower tone. So I started experimenting with that. What possessed me, like you, when you said, what would that be like? You have different reasons. And then did you make...
And by the way, although I don't think we're small, I just think that we live in the land of giants. I think everybody else is just bigger than we are. I'm actually pretty tall.
Well, it depends on perception. I tend to be young and tall. Maybe others may not agree about the tall business, but I respect everybody. I look up at everybody.
Yeah. I look in the mirror and I see Brad Pitt.
That's nice. But how long did it take you when you finally got the titanium to make a drum that you were happy with? What was that process?
That was a bit of a challenge because there was nothing that really had come before that I could. I really didn't have any guidance, and back when I started, it certainly wasn't as easy as it is right now, where sourcing is just like a Google search. And but there was one thing that I was guided by, and that was the work of my friend Greg Keplinger. And me being somewhat of an uppity character, I guess you might say, I was looking at these drums, these super heavy drums, and I sort of, I guess, wanted to pose this alternate theory of like, well, I think with a heavy drum, at a certain point, you hit a terminal velocity. It doesn't matter how heavy it is, once it hits a certain point, that's what it is. It'll always be that thing. Doesn't matter if it's, how much it weighs. But nobody had really gone the other direction, especially with titanium.
Which is super light, right?
Well, it's super light, but more importantly, it's super strong. So I was able to, and I'm not going to give away, I'm a little bit guarded about that because, hey, everybody just got to do their own research. But the drums that I first, I took titanium to the thinnest possible gauge that I could go without the shell actually having some problems. Insofar as where the material was removed from the snare beds, the shell would bow out a little bit. And so I had to go take it back and forth, left to right, until finally I found the actual perfect formula for a titanium, where it was as thin as it needed to be, or as thin as it could be, but still the shell had the structural integrity that it needed. And once I hit that point, put the drum together and put a stick to it, I was like, I've never heard anything that sounds like this before. And I still haven't. And every time I build a titanium, 30 years in, I often say, I couldn't tell you the difference between a maple and a cherry and a walnut ply shell. I couldn't, and I don't really think anybody else can. But I can tell a titanium snare drum.
It doesn't have the metal qualities like extra ring, that kind of thing, like a typical metal drum would?
The feedback that I got from, and continue to get from drummers, is that metal snare drums, generally speaking, at the time when I started, and even now, they had a certain harshness to them. Like metal was like, oh, it's ringy and piggy and sort of a little bit, brash and didn't have that warmth. And the thing about titanium was it had all of the great properties of metal drum, but it took in all of the great properties of a wood shell drum. And so you had this tone, and that's the thing about the metal itself is, and the best way I've learned to describe it is the metal has an inherent dissonance to it, where if you take a piece of brass or bronze and you strike it, that it'll just resonate like a note, just like a bell or a chime or anything. You hit it, it has a certain weight to it, and that weight translates into a fundamental. And when you shape that, you get a note. With titanium, when you hit it, you were getting this complexity, just like a cymbal. You'd give it a little tap, and it'd be like, instead of hearing one note, you're hearing a choir. You could hear these little high notes resonating and these little low fundamentals. And that was also the beauty of the metal itself was, and I use this analogy a lot when I do my workshops. Drummers tend to think of drums in terms of drums and cymbals in terms of cymbals. And what I like to do is explain sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the word.
Like the
well, if you're going to a gig and you're only going to take one cymbal, what are you going to take? Are you going to take your 24-inch heavy ping ride of death, or are you going to take a thin crash that you can both ride and crash on? And that's the word, versatility. So what I found is that when you have a thin shell, you have that versatility. And I can't think of anything that's more useful is if you're going to have to use only one drum. If you're only going to take one drum to the studio, are you going to want something that you're going to be able to dial in? It's going to be able to do this, and it's going to be able to do that. Or you're going to bring 12 drums and go through them all and spend an inordinate amount of time. That's the kind of thing. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at.
Interesting. Yeah. And you started with just the snare drum or the whole kit from the beginning?
No, just the snare drums. Just
Okay.
the snare drums. The kits came later, and it's never been my focus to make kits. I've made, and I honestly don't know how many kits or snare drums I've made. I probably should have kept track, but I'm just not good at that angle of the business. But you know what I found about those drum kits, Aldo, because they're different from a snare drum, is that, and it's not just titanium, but any metal, is that once you take out all of the organic voodoo, it's this many plies, or it's this ply, or it's solid, or it's 2 plies of walnut and blah 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 cherry and the glue and the edge. Once all of that is out of the equation, you have nothing left but absolute consistency.
Right.
And so you take a titanium or stainless steel shell and you put heads on. There's nothing organic, nothing grew in that drum, and you're getting purity. There's just nothing else. And consistency. And while there's something to be said, it goes back to that old cymbal argument. This cymbal sounds great, but it's a one of a kind, and it'll never be recreated again, as opposed to, like some of the other manufacturers where a 16-inch crash is going to sound like a 16-inch crash. And if you break it, just buy another one, because it's going to sound exactly the same. So
Right.
There's good qualities in both, but there's certainly something to be said for, I don't have to worry about organic
Right.
inconsistencies.
How would you compare it to, I'm just thinking aluminum, because aluminum has those properties. It's pretty consistent, right?
Yeah, all metals are like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has more to do with their specific weights. And I don't know if I told you this story. I had, and I can't actually show you here, but I'm in my shop, and I have, this is one of my brass tube lugs, and I decided, because I found someone who could actually plate aluminum really well, I had some aluminum tube lugs made, and I was so excited. I was like, this is going to be great. Like, the weight of the titanium drum is going to be so much lighter, and it's just going to make the drum sound so much fatter. And I went and got the lugs, and I put a drum together. I was sitting right here on this bench and was so excited to hit it, and I tapped it, and it was like, ooh, that does not sound like a Dunnett Classic Titanium. And I went, maybe it was the drum head. So I threw another one off. It was like the same thing. I thought, let's try another one. I put another one on. It was like could it be the lug that is making the drum sound not like what I'm expecting? And I came to the realization that even though they have consistency metals, and how they conduct the energy that we put into them really makes a difference. And I've actually recently figured out an analogy. Have you ever seen those kinetic little toys that they have on desks, where they have a row of balls that are on strings, and you take one and it goes,
Yeah, sure.
and it'll just go back and forth like that forever. Well, those balls are all like made out of a metal that transfer that energy. And I'm like, what would happen if you took one of those balls out and put a wooden one in instead?
It wouldn't.
It's not going to work.
No.
It's going to react completely differently, and that's what happens with a drum. And I think as drummers, and it's partly the fault of the marketing departments of the past, who have done their jobs extremely well in misinforming us of how drums actually work. And I think we're getting over it now. But we tended to dissect a drum and oh, it's the shell and the edge and all of these treatments and things that we do to it. But we don't play a drum shell, and we don't play a drum hoop, and we don't play a bearing edge. We play a snare drum. So
yes,
in this recipe of this cooking recipe of making a drum, it's like, oh, the beans taste great, and the vegetables taste great, but the sauce doesn't. And you put it all together, and it's like, do you kind of get the analogy that I'm trying to go there? It's like,
yes.
We don't. Some things can be great by themselves, but ultimately, when we sit down as drummers and put the snare drum in front of us, that's what we got. And sometimes the stew works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, Ron. Thanks for clearing that up, because now I just had a eureka moment. I never realized that the lugs had that much impact on the drums. We know, for example, I mean, we all experimented with different rims, right? Thin rims or die-cast rims, and that makes a difference. We heard it in the original Gretsch drums. I remember, why is this different? And of course, that made a difference. And so all the parts, of course, thank you for shedding light on this. This is it's beautiful, Ron.
Well, I'll make 2 points. What I really found, and again, what I teach in my workshops, is that there's a couple of really beautiful things about a drum. And drums being a kinetic instrument, a percussion instrument, they are sensitive to their, ultimately, what really changes a drum is weight and weight distribution. And I won't get too deep into that. But and that's why when you're talking about changing a hoop, you put a wood hoop on, it's like, oh, this sounds totally different. And then you put a die-cast hoop on, it's like, that is a different drum. If I was blindfolded, I wouldn't be able to tell you it was the same drum. But here's the beautiful thing about a drum, is that it's the only instrument where form does not destroy function. So what I mean by that is, you take a guitar, it's got 6 strings and the body and the neck and all the components, and you put it together, and it doesn't matter how that thing is configured. If those 6 strings aren't tuned or tensioned to a specific tension to form a particular note, the instrument fails. It's out of tune, it doesn't work. A drum is not tied to that. And that's what makes it so beautiful for all of us. As drummers, we can play anything and be absolutely, completely musical. And therefore, I've always had this feeling that tuned instrument musicians tend to look down on drummers, because we're lesser, because we don't understand an A flat diminished or the chords or whatever it is. Okay. But at the same time, we can sit down on almost anything and play a tune. And it doesn't have to be tuned to a particular thing. In fact, you know what? That's the joy of our instrument, is that we have the ability to create this absolute chaos amongst what we're playing and make it into something beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then those of us who do go on and learn the structures of music and all of that business, then we could take that a notch higher or more, right?
Yeah, but who's got time? Who's got time for that?
I have another question. No, I have another question. Later on, as you were building these drums, then you got into designing. What else were you experimenting with in your journey as we're speaking? Shaping your journey. Like, what made you decide then? Okay, I'm going to expand this into something else. What are some of the other things that you've been messing around with?
Oh, sometimes you come by it accidentally, and sometimes it's a very long process. Like, for example, and I hope I'm answering your question here. Recently, I've done a redesign on my wood metal hybrid hoop, which is basically I take and I'm looking to see if I have one here handy, but I basically I've taken a metal ring and inserted it and press fitted inside a wood hoop. The idea being is that when wood hoops are very susceptible to damage because, generally speaking, they're made out of maple or softer wood, and drummers are playing with hickory and oak and composite sticks, and the wood's always going to lose when you're hammering it with something like that. So right. I just discovered a way to be able to have all of the properties of wood hoop without having it being constantly destroyed. And how that came about, I was in my shop one day and I had a little hanger where I'd had a bunch of different hoops, and I was reaching and I actually just pulled down a wood hoop and a single flange hoop at the same time. And they actually sort of coupled together, and I was like, look at that. I wonder if I could, I'm wondering if I could push that metal ring inside that. And so within a matter of 10 minutes, I had machined the wood hoops so that this metal ring just actually perfectly snugly fit inside of this thing. And I put it on a drum, and I was like going, oh my God. I took one of those mainline composite sticks and I beat the daylights out of it. And I think from the time I picked those off the rack until I called my patent attorney, it was probably not more than a half an hour.
Wow.
I wish it was like that with everything. Juxtapose that against, although I've been working on a bass drum pedal for almost 10 years now. And I'm close, and I think it's going to be finally done this year.
Nice.
But that is a process that I sometimes regret, because I know I could have bought myself a really nice Tesla with all the money that I poured into it. And now it's just a vanity project. It's like, no, I have to finish this now before I die, because because I just have to. So
for self-respect,
right? It's like, I have to do this. But,
listen, I know what you mean, because these things just eat away at you, and it's funny because during the whole 2 years of not touring, during the whole COVID time, it allowed me to bring out all those many ideas I had that I hadn't patented, because I'm a bit of an inventor myself, always have been, but I always pushed it away because I had so many things going on. But then I said, okay, now's the time where you can do all that filing and actually sitting with an attorney and understanding all of that stuff and taking the time. It's very laborious. And so I've done it, so I know exactly what you mean. Not just the cost, but the patience. And then you start, and then you have to finish. Of course.
Yeah. And you know what I get, it guides me in this process of designing, is that, and I do get, I from time to time, I mentor or I field questions from basically drummers like myself who've, you know, come up with something and think that it's a great idea and they want to talk about a patent. And I've seen a lot of good ideas and I've seen a lot of bad ideas. And I think what is the guiding principle is necessity, I suppose, or as I like to, it's the question you got to ask yourself: have you invented a solution to a problem that doesn't exist? And I see that so often. And I'm like going, and I really don't want to discourage anybody. If they're, you know, I want to encourage people to do that, and so I'm always. It's hard to say, I don't think this is going to work, but I like how you think, and don't stop thinking, you know. But yeah, so that's been, I guess, the reason why I've had the level of success I've had is because I've had ideas that I've applied my own formula to and went.
Sure. Now, when you see when you see something that could be done better, I mean, obviously you're drawn to it, and you have to resolve it, right?
Yes.
I mean, the rim idea. I remember you made me think of a story. I remember at COSA, one day Joe Morello comes in, and he sits down, and of course, you know, he was fairly blind, so he sits down and touches his snare drum, and the first question he says, "Was Carmine Appice here?" So that made me you made me remember that. And of course, the previous class, we had 5 classes, you know, so what we do is like 5 classes going on at all times. So it's very intense. So the person who was in that room before him was Carmine. And of course, smashing, yes. And the rim, of course, probably looked more like a U and not a straight line. that was funny. But it's great to have someone like yourself who's always creative, always looking for a better way to do things. And I mean, I read recently that you had acquired something else in another brand, which was interesting. You want to talk about that a little bit? That's exciting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I acquired the rights to the amazing, this beautiful piece of Canadiana, Milestone Percussion. And as a young drummer growing up on the prairies, I remember there was a fellow drummer who had a Milestone kit, and I'll never forget envying how cool the kit looked, and more importantly, how awesome it sounded. And you know, that stayed with me. I just loved it. And I'm not sure what happened to the brand. You know, it from my perspective, it ended with the passing of, you know, when Michael Clapham stopped making those drums. Michael Clapham was the Milestone founder, and when I was able to file for and acquire the trademark for Milestone, so I never got, just like as it was with George Way, there was really nothing. There was no tooling. It was just the name. So I've been working on it now for realistically, I guess you could say 4 or 5 years, and the work in earnest has begun just over a year ago. So I'm really excited about it. And as it was with George Way, some of the challenges come in trying to pick up where Michael Clapham left off. And of course, that's been a long time, well over 20 years. Wow. And so a lot of things have changed in the industry. So you're always evaluating how things were done then, and what they had available to them, and what manufacturing process you have available to you now. And even though it's been a very short time frame of probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I found a process for recreating those shells that is far more efficient than the way that Michael was making shells. And I'm sure if he had had the opportunity, he would have, in my mind, I'm like going, well, if Michael was in the room with me right now, and I never met him, unfortunately, I was just that behind the curve. Same thing with George Way, but I'm kind of getting to know him through his family. His son, Sean, the estate has been, he's on board with it, has been very helpful, and he's going to be sharing some images and that I'm going to add to the website, because I think in addition to just the product, it's the story. I think that is the most important thing. And when you have this iconic brand that these guys, we talked about this, Jerry Mercer and Gary McCracken and Bob Ezrin, and some of the work that he did. And again, and that was one of the things, I just thought of this, Aldo. Those composite shells, again, took that organic thing out of the picture. And I don't think that there was ever a resistance to that in the market. I just think maybe it wasn't explained properly, because of all the drums that I've made here, titanium, brass, bronze, copper, and all of the design changes that I've done to and with those metals, they've all been successful. So I don't think I'm going to be up against that. I think I'm really excited about it. And I have. Hang on a second.
Nice. Well, the other thing too is like what you were saying also, I don't think there's a resistance, because, wow, if it sounds good and, oh, wow, that looks beautiful. I remember I remember that.
This is the pre-production prototype, and I
Milestone.
did a little tweaking. I redesigned the lug. Now this is just a prototype badge. I'm in the process of well, I may as well tell. You know what? Why not share this here? The plan for Milestone this year, just to get things rolling, is to introduce a 50th anniversary drum, because Milestone basically started in and around 1972, and of course it's 2022. That's 50 years. That's a long, great history, even though there's been a lot of gaps in there. And so my plan is to offer a run of 100 50th anniversary drums. I'm calling it the Founders Model.
Nice.
Because
nice.
I think it's important to pay homage to Michael Clapham and the work that he did in starting and building this brand. So we're going to do a very special minted badge. And as you can see here, this is a gold sparkle model. We're going to do gold, silver, and copper sparkle in various sizes. And I think what's important to note is, and this is one of those changes that I was talking about, when Michael started making shells, he was actually using fiberglass. So it was if you know anything about making anything out of fiberglass, like a boat, it's a really arduous, labor-intensive project, having to lay up this fiberglass cloth and then the resin. And so I'm using a process that eliminates the fiberglass cloth.
Okay.
So this is pure resin.
Wow.
And it's just as strong. It's as strong as it needs to be. It has all of the qualities of fiberglass without all of that extra labor-intensive work. And the beautiful part about it is that sparkle finish, those sparkles that you see in there, those are actually embedded in the resin and run through the shell, even on the inside. So you're getting this absolutely gorgeous, bulletproof instrument. Now, I like doing this test. This is an old Michael Clapham test, so watch your ears. But It's bulletproof. When I'm
Nice.
demonstrating this, I'll take that stick and I'll hit it so hard. I'll say, cover your ears. And it's just fantastic. It's just love a material that's impervious to weather or the rigors of being on the road and still maintain the beauty of being what it is, a beautiful instrument.
And here's another one for you. You just made me think quickly is, when we're playing Cuban rhythms on a drum set, the original guys and some of the guys who are transferring the cascara will play it on the floor tom. For me, that's like, it's insane. It's not just the volume, but you're killing the drum. And I've said, not my drum, But with this, no problem.
I invite all players who like to do that to come and check these out, because you'll be able to, now yourself out, kid.
Well, now I think he solved the problem now. Yeah. Another one.
Right.
Beautiful. Because I always tell my students, play on the rim of the floor tom or on having that metal sound and playing the cascara rhythm there, because originally you played on the timbales, on the sides of the timbales, right? So you want to replicate that sound, and you can come close on the rim. But this one is deeper, and you can do a lot more, and it has that kind of woody, I'm presuming. I don't know. I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. It has it definitely has a synthetic sound to it, but I just think that I'm not as well versed in Latin music as I would very much like to be. Not that I don't love and appreciate it, but I just think that, that sound might actually be something very desirable. We'll find out. I mean, at some point, I'm going to have to get you one of these drums. So,
we'll have to showcase. I want to see it in action, and then let's make it happen. Yeah, that'll be great.
Absolutely.
What are some of the other things that where drumming is such a great thing that you're always on the creative, always solving, always inventing. I mean, that's always been my story, and I just love to do it. Anything, if it's there are 7 notes, and like any textures and anything is a musical instrument. I mean, call it a drum or whatever. It's like a cymbal to me. When you play a cymbal, you're playing like many notes, and you choose which note, and the same thing with a drum. There are pitches, there are intensities, there are nuances, it's so complex, which is fantastic. And then you mix them, and it gets even better. So you have a whole universe of this, these sounds, and it's phenomenal.
I think there's more timbres available to us than there are colors.
Yep.
When I think about it, it's like that's the other beautiful thing. Just being able to change the feeling of a piece of music just by changing what you're holding in your hand, not just the dynamic, but just switching from a brush to a mallet to a stick to almost anything. As percussionists, we are absolutely unlimited by anything. We're only limited by our own creativity. And I think, I'm sorry, guitar players. I'm sorry, tuned instrument players. I think in some way it makes us. We certainly have a huge spectrum of what we can do.
Yeah, and that never ends. I have another question. I remember the North drums. They were also fiberglass, right?
I think the North were, I believe they were acrylic.
Acrylic.
I think, I think what you might be thinking about is Staccato. And Staccato, Staccato were fiberglass. They had the strange bass drum that looked like a set of boxer shorts. I remember seeing one of my favorite drummers, Canadian drummer Rocket Norton, out with Prism, and he had a set of staccatos, and
Staccatos, yes,
I was a master gate crasher, and I got in to see him. I was on stage during sound check where I had no business being, and but he was always very nice to me. And I remember him telling me that, you know, he just got this red staccato kit and he had it painted red at a Porsche dealership, and I was just like, oh, I just love that stuff. And that's, you know, it was the enthusiasm and the creativity of the instrument itself that made me, you know, want to do that. When I started taking lessons in that group home, it was a blue sparkle, no name. I don't even think it was a Sears kit, just this, you know, very poor quality kit. And, you know, when people ask me, well, when did you start? And I go, well, it started the first time I laid a stick on a drum, because as soon as I did that, I went, this could be better. Well, this doesn't work. This is broken. This is, and that's where it all began. And I think for drummers and inventors and anybody who's ever done anything in our industry, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
It's like, same thing with George Way, you know, oh my God. And that's a great segment, because I always like to say this, no matter who I'm talking to, but anybody who's playing drums today, anybody who's manufacturing drums today, you owe a debt of gratitude to George Way, because he was the first to do so many things. If you're the little swivel nut that you have inside of every lug, that was George's invention. He was the one who invented that. Yep.
Wow.
He, yeah.
Wasn't he, like, we're talking, I think I looked him up. 1921 rings a bell in my mind.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, he actually started, George was the original rock star. George came from a very wealthy family, who ultimately disowned him because he wanted to be a musician in the rock and roll arena of the time, which was vaudeville. He wanted to be a circus performer, a vaudeville drummer.
Living where?
And on the road, circus tents, traveling. And so his family just, you know, disowned him. In fact, in the estate here, I have the letter his dad wrote him. It's like,
don't come back.
Yeah, don't come back.
Wow.
You're hopeless. And but you know, you got to admire that about. You hear the stories now where guys go, no, I was told I couldn't do this, or I shouldn't do this, or that I should do something else, and they were, you know, all of those people we know that just stayed married to their music and followed that. So and ultimately that road brought George to Edmonton, Alberta, where he was doing vaudeville at the Pantages Theatre, and he hooked up with the boiler man there, who was also sort of a do-it-yourself engineer kind of guy, and they came up with a metal drum shell and started the Advanced Drum Company, which was Canada's first drum company, and is now Canada's oldest drum company, I suppose. And he had great success with that, and eventually that success was enough to catch the attention of, now just think of it, in a time when there was no social media, there was barely operating telephones, and Ulysses Leedy in the United States heard of George Way and sent him a telegram, which I actually still have, and said, kid, I got a job for you. I know you're doing well, and I don't want to tear you away, but I think you could, not in the language of the time, I think you could kick some ass up here. And George thought about it and went, you know what? I'm going to do that. And so he packed up Elsie, his wife, who was a Canadian that he met in Edmonton, and they had an incredible journey. They, you know, in a nutshell, George worked for virtually every drum company at the time: Rogers, Slingerland, Ludwig and Ludwig, Leedy. And he was prolific in his creativity and inventiveness, which went not just as far as drums, but he was a graphic designer too. All of those old magazines or literature, the Leedy topics, drum topics for Leedy, that was all his work. And on top of it all, he was a salesman. So he was the Leonardo da Vinci of the drum world, and a true Renaissance man. So it's,
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's, most people don't know that history, which is a shame, because I think it's super important for us to know where things come from and what the relationship is between what we're doing and what we're playing, and who did what in certainly in our community, and it's huge, And I
Absolutely.
personally only knew a little bit of this, but thank you for sharing. This is great.
Well, I think it's important to know. Like, you can't be a pilot unless you know you're playing inside and out, and you can't be a Formula One racer unless you know your vehicle inside and out. And while I understand there's a certain type of drummer that just doesn't care what they play, they'll sit down and they'll be who they are on that kit or whatever it is they're playing, no matter what. And that's a beautiful thing. But to be able to appreciate, Joe Farnsworth was just in town a few weeks ago at Corey Weed's doing a little jazz festival thing. And I was so glad to meet Joe, because he is one of those guys. Not that he didn't care about his instrument, but I was doing backline for that, and I could throw anything at him, and he loved it. And he just loved it. And I'm like going, this is a special guy. This is a unique guy. I don't meet a lot of drummers like Joe. So,
what about somebody like Ray Ayotte, who was also in Vancouver and for a time created the Ayotte custom drums? Remember those?
I do. I do.
I mean, there was a whole line of, that lineage, and there was some other manufacturers. I mean, a lot of drums come and go, but it's nice to see that people at least take the time and create things. I mean, whether they last or not, there are always reasons why, or exceptional circumstances that lead things left or right. It's like when you look at the Ludwig story. It was Ludwig and Ludwig. It was then Leedy was involved, and if you take the time, then you understand the path. It seems like Chicago was a big center for the American drum community, and in Canada there were people building, but the West was, no real center, right? But I'm seeing that in BC there's a lot going on. Has been going on.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it actually has been, in the States, I think Indiana, Elkhart was really sort of the crucible of where a lot of the, current drum percussion kind of stemmed from. And then I think generally speaking, there was kind of a shift west, both in the States and in Canada. And both Milestone, and I think Ray also had a hand in Staccato at some point there. So he was, he really did some amazing things. And when Ayotte came out, it's like it is with anybody who's the figurehead of a company, like the Don Lombardis of the world. It's not that you're the guy who has to invent everything, but you're the conductor, and you orchestrate and control everything. Conductor might not be able to play the cello or the violin or the piano or a timpani or anything like that, but I guess the word I'm looking for is vision. And Ray Ayotte was a visionary, and he had a vision and ideas. And however he got to that point to make some of those, those beautiful AOT kits, you know, I just admire that. And same thing with people like Don Lombardi.
Yes.
Just
yes.
to, and even some of my dealers that I have, there's Jim Pettit and in Memphis, and Shane Kinney in Portsmouth, and the vision that they have or had going in. God, I just admire people like that. Yourself, I mean, you're an educator, educators as well. Jared Falk here with Drumeo. That's one thing that I see all of these people having in common. And it's funny, I guess I have that too. I never feel like and I come by it honestly, I never feel like I deserve to be included in that. But I guess I've been, when you understand what that vision is, what it really boils down to is you're just stubborn.
Yeah, I was going to say it's called.
No, man, I want it this way, and yeah, that's fine. But that you do that your way, but this is how I'm going to do it, and I'm not taking no for an answer. And God,
Yeah.
that's a wonderful thing when you see that.
Oh, absolutely, and you're clear to yourself. You're absolutely clear that this is the way. I mean, you make sure that what you're doing is healthy, it's sane, and it's what makes you tick. And it is you.
Yeah.
That's who you are, and I think that's important. No matter what you do, it's understanding who you are and stick by it. Now, as long as you're not hurting anybody or taking food from anyone or doing something that's like totally incorrect. I mean, you're adding. You're always adding because you're doing something that you can bring to the table, and that's where that's a personal thing. That if you could do something that brings something to the table, makes the world a better place. End of story. And you stick,
I
stick to I stick to it. you know.
Well,
something.
I think, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I've been thinking it. Well, I had a really bad accident about 7 years ago, and I think that's when I got a head start on thinking about things from the viewpoint of, understanding finally how absolutely fragile we are physically and mentally, thinking of that in terms of legacy. So I think you're right, and I guess when I think about in terms of myself, I look and I go, I might not have changed the world. I never set out to, and given that I came from some pretty humble beginnings, but it really warms my heart to think that long after I'm gone, I'll have left some really, really nice instruments that are going to continue to help musicians make the music that they hear in their heads, for a long time after. That's a really precious form of resonance that I'm sure you get it.
And it also, it gives you purpose. I mean, your thing about while we can, I think it's important to think you have to do those things while you can, because the moment you can't, you only realize, like when you had the accident. Last summer, for example, for me, I had a small accident. I broke my heel, and I was in a cast, and I was in a wheelchair for 6 weeks, and in my house. So I was teaching from my house, and it's doing some recordings, people sending me things, but I couldn't leave my house. So I was watching people outside and saying, watching them walk and say, I can hardly wait till I can walk. And that's huge, because imagine if you don't have your mental capacities in place and you can't walk and you can't go down the stairs, you can't do the things we take for granted, then nothing else really matters much. So your health in both ways. So we have to do things when we can. That's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've done it, Ron. You've done it, Ron. I'm sure you heard. I'm sure you
Oh
heard that
God!
a gazillion
Since
times.
elementary school, Aldo.
Sorry, it just came out. But you've done it, yeah, and I thank you, and thanks for taking the time to share your your little bit of history and teaching us some really interesting things. I've certainly learned a lot, and I thought I knew everything. Well, I'm just kidding, of course, but
Yeah.
it's nice to learn some of these things, and thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad we finally had the chance to do this, because I know we've been talking about it for a very long time, and I learned something too, and more about myself sometimes. When these things are done and I go back and watch them, I'm like going, interesting. So, but thank you for being interested enough and to do this, and it's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this. So I'm glad we had a chance to do this, and I do hope, it is my mission, one of these days I'm going to come out there, I'm going to be part of COSA, and I will bring my workshop. There is nothing more that I'd love to do. I know we've been talking about that for a long time, but I really want to do that.
So let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Be careful what you ask for. Now,
I'm asking.
yay! And let's say done it. Done.
Do it.
Yeah. So to be continued. I really thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. And I'll see you at COSA. Thank you, Ron. To be
Thanks,
continued.
Aldo.